Here with this amazing panel. And the goal of today is to discuss what solving for exposure to the innovation economy means. And so I figured before we kind of get in there and before we talk about definitions, I just wanted to get a show of hands to see who we're talking to today. So who here is a startup? A few. Who here is a venture fund? And who here is a investor allocator? And what do the rest of you do? Just hanging out.
Listen to panel.
So look, we have a pretty amazing panel that I'll introduce. So starting far on my left is Eric Upin. He was the CIO of the Stanford Endowment. Then he spun off into McKenna, I can never pronounce it properly, and now he's on the board of the Washington University of St. Louis and advises a number of other family offices. Maureen Austin wrote this amazing paper on venture investing that I've been sharing with everybody. She's at Cambridge Associates as a managing director there. And Sunny is a Mars Capital LP and is the head of the North American office for Khazanah, the Malaysian Sovereign Wealth Fund. So super amazing people, and I wanted to learn from these guys on sort of how they're investing into innovation, what they're doing, what I'm missing. My job in London is working for Neuberger, Berman, and I work with our family office and endowment clients. So I'm trying to figure out like what's the right way to do this. So before we go in, I figured we'd define the word innovation because, what does the innovation economy mean? So the best definition I found using Google was the creation, development, or implementation of a new product, process, or service with the aim of improving efficiency, effectiveness, or competitive advantage. So we'll work with that. So I wanted to start off with Maureen. If you could speak to what is Cambridge Associates telling their clients, their global clients, on the best way to invest into innovation? What works, what doesn't, what should we be doing?
Great. I love this question, in part because I recently wrote this paper. Actually, let me change that. My co-author and colleague is in the audience, David Thurston. When he's not around, I claim full credit. When he's here, I say my co-author. So we wrote this paper, Venture Capital Positively Disrupts Intergenerational Investing. And the premise of the paper is to encourage our clients to allocate more to this sector. We are finding that investors are underallocated to what I think Sumant mentioned yesterday, which is this decade ahead of us of 10 times innovation of what we've seen in the past. And so what's working for us is really educating clients and investors on why you should allocate more to venture. One, the returns are better than any other asset class, if you consider venture an asset class, but the returns in venture have been better and better than any other place to invest. Companies are staying private longer, and so more of the returns are being captured by the early investors, another reason we think people should allocate more to this. And the third premise that we find really resonating with investors is that the convergence of technology is really allowing investors to do well, which is get really good returns, but do good, doing good things for society. And we like to reference one of our good colleagues, Jeremy Grantham, famed investor, who, this is public, he's a client of ours, works closely with David to build out a venture portfolio. He's allocated 70% of his foundation to venture, with 50% of that investing in ideas that are going to solve climate change and improve the environment, and is one of the top performing portfolios out there. So this is what we're doing to encourage our clients to access. Combined with that, we're working to dispel myths of venture capital. The three main myths are it's too risky. If you look at loss ratios, that's not the case. The loss ratios have come down quite a bit over the last 20 years. You can't get access unless you're in the top tier venture names. That's not the case. 70% of the top performers are new and developing funds. And and just lots of good reasons to do venture.
Okay, well, another show of hands. Of all the allocators here, are you already allocating into venture? I mean, of all the people who raised their hands earlier, who is an allocator who's not allocating to venture? Who Maureen can then talk to and become a future client? Okay, there. So everybody who is an allocator is already allocating to venture. Is your allocation above 5%? Anybody over 5? All right, a couple, okay. We have some ideas for you. So, so with that, with the 70%, so are you guys at Khazanah at 70%? I mean,
No.
tell me about what you guys are doing in terms of your reasons to invest into venture.
Sure.
Why do it?
And if I may, maybe I'll give you my working definition of how we're thinking of innovation or venture and whatnot. At least when I think of what is actionable in the world of investing in innovation, the way I think about it is there need to be three things there. One is there need to be certain advances in science, technology, business model, whatever it is. So there needs to be something of that sort that is different. Then, at least for us, the opportunity either needs to be very large, or maybe the disruption needs to be very large for entities to sort of change in response to it. Small innovation is fine, happens day to day, but if you can't invest into it, it may not give us returns in the time scale that we're looking for. And then, for us, the last thing is companies or entities need to be responding to this. So either entrepreneurs need to be starting companies and attacking the industry, which kind of, again, means the problem is large enough to matter and potentially could be solved commercially. Or the other thing we see is, are large companies responding to it? So are people adopting certain changes that are happening either to increase productivity or to avoid disruption or something like that? So once you have these things sort of mixing in, it becomes interesting for us to invest in. And we've been around about 25 years. We've been direct investors for 25 years. Historically, a lot of what we did was more private equity type of work, but over time, we are doing more venture, or I should say growth. And the reason for that is returns. So like you said, the returns are great when things work out on a portfolio basis. The returns are pretty phenomenal. So, but you do have to watch for things like adverse selection and things like that. Now, a lot of people say, okay, sovereigns, so they probably have other agendas and country building stuff and all that, which is fine. But if there are no returns, we just don't even look at deals. So we do expect market returns, and that's just a good discipline to have. Now, after you've invested in an entity, and mostly what we do is direct investing. We do some fund investing also. After you've invested in an entity, there are other benefits you can bring forth from there. So, like you mentioned, we're LPs in March. We can get additional deal flow. We can get insights. We can meet a lot of great people at conferences like this, great companies. So, that's additional benefit that comes. The other bit is we have a very large portfolio of, I wouldn't say companies that are non-innovative, almost everyone's innovating, but companies in traditional sectors. And so what we're able to do is, I run the US office from San Francisco. We see a lot of interesting things that are happening. We also talk to a lot of our large portfolio companies and see are there things one can do to bring companies from here, customers from there, and then vice versa, help companies there if they're struggling with certain problems. Are there things one can do here that can benefit them? And we just don't do it in the US. We do it across the globe. So we have different offices in different countries and sort of pull innovation from different areas. Ultimately, the ultimate purpose is really money-making, improving companies, improving productivity, which broadly aligns with country-building goals also.
So that's the positive story. And I think, I know a lot of clients have had positive returns and have made money. I do hear pushback from clients which are just like, tech's a big bubble, there's no innovation, everybody's got an app, nothing real is happening. So I wanted Eric's opinion on, is there enough innovation out there to actually invest in? And also, are VC firms innovating themselves? I mean, venture 1.0, 2.0, kind of where are we? Is anybody doing something interesting?
Okay. I'd say the direct answer to your question is I think we're in a golden age of innovation. We've never had this much capital, because the world is awash in excess capital with record low interest rates, first time in US history to be at the level we are at, and with extraordinary money printing and debt creation, US debt going from $3 trillion in 2001 to $20 trillion just today adding $1 trillion a year, soon $2 trillion a year. We are awash in capital. So we've never had this much innovation with this much access to capital. And it is a golden age of creativity. Two, taking from a lot of the thinking around the book Second Machine Age, that we're really entering a combinatorial period of innovation where we are building on top of platforms rather than building them all ourselves, meaning robotics are putting computers in moving parts, autonomous driving is putting computing and all kinds of sensor technology in a vehicle, that you are able to leverage that and get even more operating leverage. And many are saying soon we will see the first billion-dollar valuation of a company less than 5 people, because you can have Amazon host it and you can build on top of a variety of other language platforms and use the web for massive viral. So one, huge creativity. 2, combinatorial. 3, every industry is now on target for disruption. And the term innovation, at least coming from the very large endowments, over 10 billion, 25 billion, and when you're at that level, quite hard to get that deployed into venture. And I also work with a lot of large family offices that are in the lower end of that range. There really are 2 components to innovation, to your question. One is you are building a better widget and displacing and disrupting an existing industry and creating what is already a great market, a market share gainer, if not the market leader in an existing industry. And in technology, most of the old guard never makes it to the next iteration and generation. All the mainframe companies couldn't make it to mini computers, they couldn't make it to PCs. You saw the same going to the web and now to the cloud and beyond. So there's innovation and opportunity as every industry is now ripe for disruption, and you're seeing the creation of new industry segments. Social media didn't exist not very long ago, and a whole host of other services. And these have all resulted in profound and huge investment opportunities and sizes of company. So the third piece is we really are at a point where everything is now being targeted for disruption. So in the current area of disruption, we're seeing tremendous advances in food tech, tremendous advances in energy, clean energy, and collecting and capturing carbon. You're seeing huge advances in digital health and trying to lower the cost of healthcare, huge advances in cancer and life sciences, huge advances in virtual reality. So, I mean, the list goes on. In fact, the big challenge around this, is there enough innovation, is that before, you could argue, because being an old guy, the original venture categories were hardware, software, and telecom. And now, whether it's cloud, AI, and social, or whatever you would consider the 3 big areas, it's really everything now. So when you look at a venture portfolio, do you have exposure to a new market? Space transportation. SpaceX has been an extraordinary story. Do you have exposure to autonomous machines, whether in a factory or flying around delivering things? So it is no longer just a couple of venture firms give you exposure to that innovation. It now is the entire waterfront of North America, and you can't just hire a couple managers and solve that problem. So yes to the innovation.
Yes to the innovation. So Maureen, I guess if you could carry on with the thought on, okay, we should have exposure to venture and innovation because that's where the returns are. Check. And it's real innovation. Okay, we believe that. So when you guys are telling clients, hey, you should be allocating to venture, what are some of the issues you're running into? Like, what are problems that people should watch out for?
Right. So just, I wanted to build on a point here on one of the myths I think also out there is that, to your point, to tech bubble, that there's more money being raised in venture than ever before. But when you look at the market opportunity, you know, a market cap of global equities of, I don't know, 85 trillion plus or minus 10%, depending on what the market's doing, versus what's being raised in venture, it's not there. And yet we do have a lot of capital and very experienced venture capitalists out there. But the trick is, well, not the trick, I would say, the challenge is, how do you find those new emerging and developing managers where you can get access? And you know, the premise that you have to be in those top names that you can't get access to be successful, then where do you go? You have to find the new emerging developing managers. And bringing a disciplined process to that, which we feel we do quite well at Cambridge, years of tracking managers, a due diligence process, a bottom-up research, understanding, the ecosystem, and really aligning with those new emerging and developing managers early in the process is really key to success, we feel, in this space. In addition to that, you mentioned co-invest and investing alongside. You want to avoid adverse selection, so you want to be partnered with managers who are not going to give you the portfolios in their portfolio that they don't necessarily like, but the ones where they really feel very confident are going to do quite well and give you the opportunity to invest alongside. But I think so just to summarize, I think the two challenges are, one, really educating investors that this is the golden age. This is a really, really opportune time to be allocating capital to this space via venture capital funds, and having a disciplined, well thought out process for how to find the right managers to partner with are the keys.
Okay, so I guess let's take that golden age idea further, because I do believe that. But I guess what's interesting right now, Eric, I mean, you've seen this market for a long time, right? When you look at what are areas of innovation that you think not enough people are looking at that people should? Like, what are you looking at now?
Okay, sure. First, I'd add one other component to innovation besides disrupting the existing guard, building new markets, whether it's the SpaceX and the whole litany of companies that are in space transportation. The third is a very deep and real area, to your point, is this movement, which is deep and real, lots of skepticism, hard as hell to do, is the impact investing. And particularly the younger generation is asking large endowments, a lot of the families that I work with are, how are you investing that capital to make the world better? Do not want to profit at the expense of oppressing people. So some of the areas of innovation, some are around these social causes. So there's quite a bit of movement around financing female and minority-led businesses. Women get about 2 to 3% of venture capital. It's probably the most one-sided of any industry in the world. And so a lot of capital is going now to firms getting started to back people that don't have the right peg shape to get capital easily from Sand Hill Road investors. Another interesting area is around affordable housing and trying to address some of the housing issues. I mentioned before digital health. There's a lot of work around trying to lower cost of healthcare through better patient records, being more innovative in how you're getting medical care from nurses and doctors. The area of food tech is very interesting, new forms of protein. The area of carbon capture and alternative energy, there is a lot of movement to use glass on buildings and cars to generate power and capture that power. What's going on in batteries is very interesting. Some of that's well known. Some of the very big areas, which we've heard at this conference around AI and really developing smarter machines that get smarter over time. Another big area is in education that we're looking for, less covered. There's so many different kinds of brains that learn so differently, and how do you try and level the playing field? There's some social inclusion in that as well, because you're trying to level playing field in that area. And then a lot of interesting things being done in the manufacturing machine processing, automated factories, 3D printing. A lot of that's then spilling into some of this autonomous driving, autonomous vehicles. So I would say, if anything, you have to be really careful in venture, because there is so much innovation, and some of this stuff really is trying to change the world and really take something completely different that could be incredibly scalable. Back to the second machine age argument, the size these companies can get is really stunning. It's almost, you have to be careful not to get too sucked in, especially late in the cycle where you can tend to pay up.
So, Sunny, how do you tie in with, you guys obviously have a big portfolio, and the overall goal, I guess, is to grow the wealth of the Malaysian state, sure, right? So when you're doing all of this, how do you use the investments that you're making to, I guess, improve your whole portfolio, or to make an impact on the country?
Yeah, so when at least I think about innovation, and innovation exposure, the first thing, at least the more defined part of that for us is, yes, putting money into interesting companies or interesting funds that take exposure there. The tougher to define part is how do you bring some of your portfolio companies, where we actually have a lot more deployed, to a level of productivity or innovation that'll let them keep up with the world. Not easy being in Asia, so we've to bridge that. The other thing we look at is, how do you create an ethos of innovation in the regions that you're in this case, Malaysia? Because longer term, if you have enough entrepreneurs there, if some of the policies are conducive to innovation, a lot of these portfolio companies will anyways get helped by better people. And then internally for us, we look at things as well as Khazanah, what are we doing to become a better investor? One aspect of it, better investment operations and things like that. But the others also, how do you find, say signal in data? So, looking at other diverse data sources, sort of trying AI and to find signals there and those sorts of things. So we do all of this. The tangible way a lot of this works out, at least for our portfolio firms, is sort of bridging companies here that are very interesting, have very good technologies like security and other spaces where the US is a leader, to do something with our portfolio companies. They become customers and they help themselves. Some of the companies we are invested in are doing that anyways. We'll take CEOs, VPs of sales and others to different companies in our portfolio, and our portfolio is across about 15, 20 different countries now. So we'll take them and see where one can add the most value. So that's one tangible way one can do it. The other things we've done have been things like sponsoring startup accelerators, things like that, experimenting with doing things like we'll do one-for-one funding. If some interesting person is investing in a company, we'll put some of our money, somewhat like angel lists, syndicates, but for a local geography region. And then internal, like I mentioned to you, we are experimenting with different data sources and all of that.
So one of the people I work with is a gentleman called Jacob Rothschild. So well-known family. And so one thing he told their family office maybe 2 years ago was, I only want you to get 2 things right for the next 5 years, biotech and China. So I wanted your view on, we're kind of sitting here near Silicon Valley, we're talking about US innovation, but how do you compare what's happening in Asia and China versus what's happening here?
So I've looked at all these markets globally, and the level of innovation almost everywhere is actually very high, and China at least has done very well with Alibaba and Tencent, starting with just regular apps and chat, and then now entering into financial services, and sort of building sort of super apps. Beyond that, they've done quite a bit of interesting work on logistics and things like that, which you sit there and you admire. The US has traditionally been very, very good at enterprise level innovation. China is not there yet. In time, it will potentially get there. But we are primarily looking at the tech sector, and we're looking at healthcare. If I look at healthcare, China's not quite there yet. The US and Europe have really been the drivers of global innovation, but sooner or later they will get there. So the comparison is somewhat situational, somewhat specific to sector, and it's actually very hard to compare. There are companies there that have made billions, and I was reading there are a number of the number of new unicorns there is growing at a faster pace than here, but it depends on what sector and depends on where you're starting off from.
So we have 30 seconds, which means we have time for one question. So who's going to be the lucky person who pulls off a question? Anybody feeling lucky?
Oh, there's one there.
One in the back.
So in terms of social impact, with social impact, that has to be fused with some other industry. What other industry would we have in mind that we'd fuse social impact with? We mentioned housing, we mentioned machine learning. What are thoughts?
Anybody have strong views there?
Oh, okay. In terms of what industries, I mean, affordable housing, housing is a huge issue. You're seeing a lot of innovation in prefabricated homes, mini homes and small homes. A lot of that's being done by foundations, so you're starting to see some bleeding. One of the interesting things in venture is there's no one firm that can be expert in all these areas. If every industry is ripe for disruption, you're seeing, and it was mentioned by Maureen, that you're starting to see a lot of new firms form very small, industry-specific focused, and some are taking on both an investment and a mission like around housing. Seeing quite a bit of that in education and curriculum development. Firms like Owl Ventures are doing very interesting work, and there's a lot of impact around that in the educational area. A big area is in healthcare, trying to lower healthcare costs, increase access and not requiring you to have to come into a doctor, and really leveraging the data so that people can not have to ask you a half hour of questions before they even begin to treat you. What's occurring in cancer and in a lot of other medical fields, when you can now map the genome of a tumor and train your immune system to attack that tumor. So as it morphs, your immune system morphs. I mean, there's really some very exciting areas in the healthcare and what that has in terms of the impact on well-being. I already mentioned inclusion, which is just a great word that how can you not celebrate, but you're really seeing that now and trying to get financing to wider groups of people. And have a lot more of a different mix of management teams. You're seeing great pressure to have more board diversity and more diversity across the organization, and that's opening up opportunities for people. So those are some of the social impact.
I agree. I think housing is a big element of the, especially like-minded housemate matching, particularly. You mentioned SpaceX. There's a lot of research and development on fabricating homes out of natural resources that are hurricane-proof for Puerto Rico and such. You know, if it can sustain on Mars, it can sustain in a hurricane-prone island. You know, so there's a lot of innovation to be done there. So thank you.
Yeah, and we don't have a lot of time, but I'll just say one last thing. I mean, one of the family offices I work with now tries to partner with cities and say, well, if you fast track the zoning, because a very big expensive part, especially in this town, you can't get something built to save your life, but if you partner with the city and say, if you give us the land and you give us the ability to build, we'll build it, and then you lease it, and you're taking a ton of risk out of the equation, you can then live with a lower hurdle rate and offer a much lower affordable housing costs to buyers or renters of that housing. So these partnerships that are occurring are also starting to happen.
Oh yeah, this is exactly what I do. I'm a housemate matcher, it's what I do. And we're creating layers of transparency between landlords, property owners, master leaseholders, and subletters. To now, there's no one doing anything like it. And we have a building 2 miles up the street that just caught fire 2 weeks ago. And I spoke to the property manager because I actually lived there years ago, and they said they don't even know 60% of the people who live in their building. They don't even know that they're there.
Wow. So we've gone 3 minutes over, so we'll end it there. I want to thank you all for being here. Please grab them afterwards and continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, man.